G'day everyone, I think we'll make a start. We might have a few stragglers, but bad luck to them. Welcome to today, which we think is a really important day to talk about where we've been in tackling phylloxera, but also where we are right now and where we want to be in the future. What we will have today is a number of presenters, particularly from the Department of Ag, talking about the broader picture with phylloxera nationally and right down to the more narrow picture on the Mornington Peninsula. We've also very lucky to have Dr. Catherine Clark from AgVic as well, who will talk extensively about phylloxera and the reason why we have the protocols in place. And Paul Dennis also from AgVic to talk about what are the communications that will go out to the wider industry about phylloxera in protecting against it. So what I thought I might do in the very first instance is just talk to you about where we've been as an association with tackling phylloxera and how we really got to this point. We can go all the way back to the year 2000, or we can go back to just very recently when we stood in footbaths here in front of you 6 months ago and had this seminar here. But over the years, some of you in the room will remember probably the first time we talked about phylloxera was in the year 2000 or 99, I think it was. We had a meeting at Hickenbotham's with Lee from EE Mewers talking about phylloxera and what it was, and at that stage I think the industry knowledge of phylloxera was reasonably poor. I think there's still a lot of work to do in that space with phylloxera, but compared to where we are now, I think the industry knowledge about phylloxera was poor. It was definitely interesting for me to understand what the King Valley area was going through with phylloxera at that stage, and we had someone from Brown Brothers at that stage down to talk to us as well. At that stage there was no phylloxera at all, or found at all, in the Yarra Valley. And we'd moved on from that point with information at that period investigating becoming a Phylloxera Exclusion Zone, or having surveys done in this area way back as far as the year 2000. I do remember Hugh Robinson setting together a questionnaire form for people about what they thought about it to get a membership idea. I don't know if anyone in the room was present at that one in 2000. Yeah, Lawrence, you remember that? At Hickenbotham's? With the usual platter at Hickenbotham's. From that, obviously the awareness was heightened once there was detections in the Yarra Valley. And we've had since then seminars in 2005, 2007, 2009, in informing people about phylloxera and the risk of it. We've also had Kevin Powell down here a number of times, and you'll hear from Catherine about how it's really gratifying to know that his work will continue through the department, and there is a research focus that will continue in his space and all the good work that he's done. So that just gives you an idea that the association's always been in this space, but coming to the here and now, when we've applied previously to the department talking about phylloxera exclusion zones, and there has been some focus on Victoria consolidating its zones against the South Australian border and other areas, so the exclusion zones were then taken up in other areas. But most recently, we were very lucky to understand the $1 million of funding that came into the Tackling Phylloxera program some 12 months ago now, which was as a result of an industry survey that was undertaken. And one of the key focuses that came out of that industry survey was that biosecurity needed high focus in the Victorian wine industry. From that discussion and from that feedback to government, AgVic took the responsibility of this $1 million program, of which Mornington Peninsula has procured $450,000 over 3 years. So at that point, AgVic came knocking on our doorstep and said, we know you've always been interested to become a Phylloxera Exclusion Zone. Here's the opportunity. And as you note from that, then we have done the survey over this last 12 months. The $1 million project itself is much broader, and Paul will talk about some of the communications with the broader Victoria in that space. As in these bullet points, there's 6 projects there. The MPVA on top of the 420,000, rather than 450, has contributed in kind to the value of at least $70,000. I think we'll blow that one out of the water in 3 years, but that's all the work that's done behind the scenes with the MPVA, the steering committee, our communications and our groundwork through our office with Cheryl, that will continue to not only continue the survey over 3 years, but continue the communication and the understanding within the industry of what Phylloxera does mean to it. So probably the other couple of things that I can tell you right here and now, the survey has been completed in the first year. That gives you a good idea of, well, it tells you exactly the vineyards that have been surveyed in 216, I think it might be. And we haven't found Phylloxera on any of those vineyards. That's very important to say to you in this space. In the first year of the survey, in all of those vineyards that were surveyed with the standard method, we haven't found any Phylloxera. We have 2 more years of the survey to go, and that is where we're verified as a PEZ, but you'll understand further from the department today what that means here and now for the next 24 months of the survey period, how we will act as a zone. And I'll leave that to the department to explain that further. This data you can see in front of you is actually owned by the MPVA, and that gives us a really good map of the Mornington Peninsula, which you already had probably 90% of, but we filled some gaps in this process of the survey, and that needs to be understood, that there is a secondary function in this survey that's really helped us to understand, yes, we do have about 1,100 hectares here on the peninsula of vineyard. That was always an assumed, very calculated guess, but it's very well understood the amount of vineyard that's on the peninsula now. And also within the SurveyMonkey survey that you guys have done, there's additional detail which is held privately by the MPVA, but gives very good gross understanding of our varieties and our clones, and right down to our rootstocks, which again are very important for Phylloxera. So I do implore you to make sure that that survey is filled out completely, if you haven't done so to this point. There is the opportunity to completely fill that out, rather than just filling it out to the point at which you tick the box to say, yes, you can have this survey on my property. That's important for the MPVA and also for AgVic to understand exactly what we have on the peninsula. And that information is very interactive in the MPVA, and we can use it in a number of ways to look at what our region comprises, including cellar doors, density in areas of vineyard and all those things. So that's where we are right now with the first year of the survey, and as I said, that'll be given more detail from our friends from the Department of Agriculture. Just to remind you, the MPVA does have signs that are available that you've seen before, and they're available, I think, price, Cheryl, for each sign? $25, core fluted, and much better weather lasting than the ones we had before, purportedly. So if yours is fading a little, then it might be time to update it. We do have examples of Phylloxera footbaths in the back of the room as well, which are available through the MPVA or through our company, Peninsula Vine Care. or you can obviously use those as an example to get a kit together yourself. They're not complicated things, but very useful and obviously needed at every vineyard. So that's really everything from me, giving you an update generally where we're at. You'll get more detail as we move through the day. We'll have a coffee break around the middle of the day after we've had a little bit of a discussion session, and then we'll come back with Dr. Catherine Clark and then with and also with Paul Dennis, and we'll try to close things up by about 12 o'clock. If you haven't already, if you could put your phone to silent, would be great. Just a little takeaway message for me, and this is outside of any zoning. This is the way I think you should always be thinking about your own vineyard. Your vineyard's within a region, and you should be thinking about the fortress of that region and who comes into our region and how they might be a risk. And we've called that Fortress Peninsula before. The Phylloxera Exclusion Zoning gives us a bit more security in that gateway, in and out of other zones, and that'll be elaborated on. Inside of that, farm gate security. Your own farm gate, treat your own farm gate as another avenue for you to make sure you know who is coming in and out and who is a risk to your vineyard and what you might be able to do. And all the protocols for those sort of biosecurities are sitting in front of you if you haven't seen these before. I think most of you will have, but they are something that's useful to give to people who don't know about phylloxera. They've got every bit of information for every kind of person that would come onto your property on them. Beyond that, the other thing to think about at all times is phylloxera-resistant rootstock. If you're refurbishing, if you're putting in a new vineyard, if you've got your typer and you've got choices to make, if you're thinking about changing variety, I think the days of top grafting, for me, they're days of history for our region. I think top grafting, if you have own roots underneath and you're thinking about top grafting, I would seriously consider, for the longevity of your vineyard, pulling that area out and putting a resistant rootstock in rather than top grafting. I think most experienced vineyard operators in the room would say that in the most you gather yourself 6 months to a year by top grafting as opposed to putting in new stock. And if you're only getting yourself forward by 6 months or a year by grafting instead of putting rootstock in, you're giving much more insurance to your property by putting a rootstock in rather than grafting and remaining on own roots. So use that opportunity to fortify your vineyard for the long term. So that's all I've got for you today. I'll leave you with a lovely picture. That's phylloxera on your roots, on roots. And just remembering they multiply quite heavily when they get on roots. So they once they are on the peninsula, they will move quickly. So all the work we're doing is to keep them out of the peninsula and keep them out of your farm gate, fortified with rootstock.